Imagine you leave your home. You leave your daughter. You leave your newborn granddaughter, a baby who is just 9 days old. You promise them you'll be back in a few months with more food, more supplies, more help. You sail away and you look back at the shore and you watch the people you love disappear behind the horizon. And then you don't come back for 3 years. And when you finally return, when you finally set foot on that shore again, they are gone. Not dead, not buried, no skeletons, no graves, no blood on the ground, no signs of a battle, no signs of a fire, no bodies at all. Just silence and empty buildings and one single word carved into a wooden post. 117 men, women, and children, including that 9-day-old baby girl, the first English child ever born in the Americas, vanished from the coast of what is now North Carolina, and in over 400 years, no government, no university, no scientist, no archaeologist, and no historian has been able to say with certainty what happened to them. This is not a legend. This is not a ghost story someone's grandmother told them. This is a documented, verified historical event with primary sources, eyewitness accounts, and physical evidence. And it remains completely, maddeningly unsolved. Welcome to the Mystery Archive. My name is Hostname, and today we are going deep into the greatest unsolved mystery in American history, the story of Roanoke, the story of John White, the story of baby Virginia Dare, and the story of that single carved word that has haunted this country for 4 centuries. Stay with me, because the deeper we go into this story, the stranger and more disturbing it gets. And by the end of this video, I promise you, you will never look at the word Croatoan the same way again. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand why 117 people disappeared, you first have to understand why they were there in the first place. And to understand that, you have to understand what the world looked like in the 1580s. It is the year 1584. Queen Elizabeth I is on the throne of England. England is powerful, proud, and deeply, desperately jealous, because Spain, England's great rival, is getting fabulously, obscenely rich from the New World. The Spanish have colonized Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. They are pulling gold and silver out of the ground by the shipload. Their empire is exploding, their treasury is overflowing, and their navy is the most powerful on earth. And England is watching all of this from across the ocean with barely concealed fury, because England has almost nothing in the New World. No colonies, no territory, no foothold, nothing. England needs land in North America. Not tomorrow. Now. Into this moment steps one of the most fascinating figures of the Elizabethan era, a man named Sir Walter Raleigh. If you don't know Walter Raleigh, here's the short version. He was brilliant, charming, politically ruthless, personally daring, and absolutely obsessed with making himself powerful and legendary. He was a favorite of Queen Elizabeth herself, which gave him access to something invaluable: royal patents. A royal patent was essentially official permission from the crown to go claim land in the New World on England's behalf, and Raleigh wanted one badly. In 1584, Raleigh sends a small exploratory expedition to the coast of North America. The scouts come back with reports that read almost like paradise: fertile land, clean water, abundant wildlife, and native peoples who seem friendly and willing to trade. The scouts make contact with 2 tribes in particular: the Croatoan people, led by a chief named Monteo, and the Secatan people. Both groups are part of the broader Algonquian-speaking culture of the eastern seaboard. Raleigh is thrilled. He names the entire region Virginia in honor of Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, which Elizabeth finds both flattering and politically useful. She grants him the patent. He starts planning a colony. In 1585, Raleigh sends the first group of settlers, about 108 men, mostly soldiers, adventurers, and technical specialists. They land on Roanoke Island, a thin sliver of land tucked between the barrier islands known as the Outer Banks and the North Carolina mainland. They build a small fort. They start exploring. They make contact with the local tribes. And then things fall apart. The relationship between the colonists and the native tribes deteriorates quickly. English soldiers, paranoid and jumpy, attack a Secatan village because they believe a native man stole a silver cup. Whether the cup was actually stolen is unclear, but the attack is real and it is brutal, and it destroys the fragile trust that had been building. Food supplies run low. The colonists have no idea how to survive off this land. Morale crumbles. Then, in a twist of extraordinarily good timing for the desperate colonists, the privateer Sir Francis Drake happens to arrive at Roanoke Island on his way back from raiding Spanish colonies in the Caribbean. Drake sees the situation, takes pity on the settlers, and offers them a ride home. They take it. The first colony is abandoned, but Raleigh does not give up. He cannot afford to, both financially and reputationally. He has invested enormous money in this project. More importantly, his patent from Queen Elizabeth requires him to establish a permanent colony, or he loses it. So he goes back to the drawing board, redesigns the entire plan, and starts recruiting for a second attempt. This time, the plan is different. No more soldiers-only expeditions. This time, Raleigh is sending families. Men, women, and children. Real settlers who will build real homes and real communities. The idea is that people with families have more to lose and more to fight for. They'll build instead of complaining. They'll plant instead of raiding. They'll stay. He recruits 117 people. He appoints a man named John White as governor of the new colony. Now, John White is a fascinating choice because he is not a military commander or a political administrator by training. He is an artist, a watercolorist. He had been part of an earlier expedition to the region and spent much of his time making extraordinarily detailed, beautiful paintings of the native people, plants, animals, and landscapes of the Carolina coast. His watercolors survive to this day and are considered among the most important visual documents of early American contact history. They are stunning works of art that also happen to be historical treasure. White is thoughtful, observant, and deeply committed to building good relationships with the native peoples, which is exactly what Raleigh needs. Among the colonists recruited for this expedition is White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, who is pregnant. Her husband, Ananias Dare, is also part of the group. On May 8, 1587, 3 ships set sail from Portsmouth, England, carrying these 117 souls toward the New World. The plan is to land at Chesapeake Bay, further north than Roanoke, a better location strategically, with deeper harbors and more fertile land. They stop at Roanoke Island along the way to check on a small group of soldiers Raleigh had left behind to hold the site. And this is where the first thing goes wrong. When they arrive at Roanoke, the small holding party is gone, and not in a good way. There are only bones left, and the bones are not intact. Something violent happened to the soldiers left behind. White's colonists are already unsettled before they've even properly arrived. Then the ship's captain, a man named Simon Fernandez, does something that historians still argue about. He refuses to take the colonists to Chesapeake Bay. He says it's too late in the season, that he doesn't have time, that he needs to get back to privateering. He essentially forces the colonists off the ships at Roanoke Island and sails away. Why? What was Fernandez's real motivation? Some historians think he was incompetent. Some think he was greedy. Privateering was more profitable than ferrying settlers. Some historians, and this is the genuinely dark theory, believe Fernandez may have been a spy working for Spain, deliberately sabotaging England's colonization efforts by stranding the settlers in a suboptimal location. Spain had spies throughout the Elizabethan court, and they were absolutely tracking England's attempts to establish New World colonies. Whatever the reason, the colonists are stuck. Roanoke Island, the site of the failed first colony, the place with the abandoned fort and the ominous bones. They have no choice. They rebuild. And then, on August 18, 1587, something happens that momentarily transforms this anxious, struggling settlement into a place of genuine joy. Eleanor Dare gives birth to a baby girl. John White, the governor of the colony and a man who has seen more of the New World than almost any other Englishman, holds his granddaughter in his arms for the first time. They name her Virginia Dare, Virginia for the region, Dare for her father's surname. She is the first English child born in the Americas. That is not a small thing. That is history, happening in real time, on a thin strip of Barrier Island in the middle of nowhere. But even as the colony celebrates, reality is pressing in from all sides. Supplies are running dangerously low. Relations with some of the local tribes remain tense. The colonists have arrived too late in the season to plant crops effectively. Winter is coming, and they are very, very far from England. The colonists hold a meeting and a decision is made. Someone needs to go back to England. Someone needs to personally approach Sir Walter Raleigh, appeal to the Crown, and secure a supply ship as fast as possible.
And that someone needs to be John White, because White has Raleigh's ear. White has credibility. White knows the situation firsthand, and White is the governor with the authority to make things happen. White does not want to go. He argues against it passionately. He has just held his granddaughter. His daughter is recovering from childbirth. His entire community, everyone he knows in the New World, is here on this island. The idea of sailing away and leaving them is almost physically painful to him. But the colonists are firm. There is no one else. It has to be White. And so on August 27th, 1587, 9 days after baby Virginia was born, 9 days after this moment of pure hope and new life, John White boards a ship and leaves Roanoke Island. As the island shrinks behind him, he has no way of knowing that he will never see any of them again. White arrives back in England in the autumn of 1587, and he immediately begins trying to organize a supply mission, and he immediately runs into a wall the size of the Atlantic Ocean, because the world has just caught fire. Spain, infuriated by English privateering raids on its colonies, and deeply alarmed by England's growing naval power, has been assembling the largest naval fleet in history. The Spanish Armada, over 130 ships, roughly 30,000 soldiers and sailors, is preparing to sail against England. The plan is straightforward and terrifying. Destroy the English navy, land an invasion force, depose Queen Elizabeth, and end England as an independent nation. Queen Elizabeth responds by doing what any monarch facing national annihilation would do. She orders every available ship in England to prepare for war. A royal order goes out. No vessels may leave English ports. The entire merchant and privateer fleet is commandeered for national defense. White is trapped on land, powerless, watching the calendar turn while his family sits on a vulnerable island across the ocean with dwindling supplies. He tries everything. He manages to arrange 2 small ships, tiny pinnaces, barely large enough to be useful, and gets permission to attempt a crossing. They set out in April of 1588. They never make it. Spanish ships intercept them in the waters north of Madeira. The pinnaces are badly damaged, supplies are lost or stolen, and the crew barely makes it back to England alive. Then, in the summer of 1588, the Spanish Armada finally comes, and England, through a combination of superior seamanship, better ship design, favorable weather, and the famous storms that scattered the Spanish fleet, defeats the Armada. England survives. Elizabeth is safe, but the war with Spain is not over. English privateers continue raiding Spanish ships and colonies for years afterward. Every ship that could be used to supply Roanoke is instead being used to make war on Spain. White petitions Raleigh constantly. He writes letters. He makes arguments. He pleads. Raleigh, to his credit, does care, but he is also a political animal operating in a complicated world, and the supply mission keeps getting delayed. 1,588 passes, 1,589 passes, 1,590 arrives. White has been separated from his family and his colony for almost 3 years. 3 years of silence. No news, no letters, no messages from Roanoke, because there is no mechanism for getting messages from Roanoke. Those 117 people are completely isolated. Finally, in 1590, White manages to secure passage on a privateering fleet heading to the Caribbean and the American coast. It is not ideal. The ship's primary mission is profit, not rescue, but it is the only option available. White takes it. The fleet crosses the Atlantic. They stop in the Caribbean first, as privateering fleets do, looking for Spanish ships to raid. Then they head north along the coast. And on August 15th, 1590, They approach the waters off Roanoke Island. Getting to the island turns out to be dangerous. The waters around the outer banks are shallow and treacherous, full of sandbars and unpredictable currents. When they try to land on August 16th, a boat capsizes and 7 men drown. It is a grim omen. Finally, on August 18th, 1590, exactly 3 years to the day after baby Virginia Dare was born, John White steps onto the shore of Roanoke Island. The settlement is silent. He calls out, "Nothing." He fires guns into the air as a signal. Nothing. He searches the area around the landing. Nothing moves. No smoke from fires. No sounds of human activity. No dogs barking. No children. No voices. Just the wind off the water. Just the sound of birds. White and his party make their way toward the settlement, and this is where the strangeness deepens. The settlement has not been destroyed. It has not been burned. It has not been ransacked by attackers who killed everyone and left the place in chaos. Instead, the buildings have been carefully, methodically dismantled.
The heavy wooden palisade that surrounded the settlement has been taken down. The houses are gone, not ruins, but gone, as if they were disassembled board by board. The heavy iron cannon that defended the settlement have been removed. All personal belongings, all supplies, all tools, everything that could conceivably be carried, is absent. This is not the aftermath of a massacre. This is the aftermath of a planned departure. Someone organized these people. Someone directed this, the careful disassembly, the removal of anything valuable or useful. This was not a panicked flight in the night. This was methodical. This took time. But where did they go? White keeps searching. He is frantic, desperate, terrified of what he might find and equally terrified of finding nothing. And then he sees it. Carved into the bark of a post, a large, sturdy post that had been part of the entrance to the settlement, are 5 letters, Croatoan, and carved into a separate tree, just 3 letters, CRO. White almost weeps with relief, not because he knows what happened, but because of what is not there. Before he left 3 years earlier, White had made an agreement with the colonists. If they ever needed to leave Roanoke, if they relocated for any reason, they would carve the name of their destination somewhere visible. And this is the critical detail. If they were leaving in distress, if they were in danger, if they were being forced to flee, they would also carve a cross above the message. There is no cross. There is no cross. To White, this means they left voluntarily. They were not fleeing a massacre. They were not being chased. They chose to go somewhere, and they left him a message telling him where. Croatoan, the island about 50 miles to the south. Modern-day Hatteras Island, the home of the Croatoan tribe. The people led by Monteo, who had been baptized as a Christian, who had traveled to England, who was possibly the most consistently friendly and trustworthy native leader the English had encountered. If the colonists were going to go anywhere, if they needed help and protection and food, Croatoan makes perfect sense. White immediately wants to sail to Croatoan. He is pushing, begging the ship captains to take him. He is 50 miles away from his daughter and his granddaughter. 50 miles. But then the weather turns. A violent storm rolls in off the Atlantic. One of the ships loses 2 anchors. Another ship is in danger of being driven onto the sandbars. The captains, whose actual priority was never rescuing these colonists anyway, make the decision that the weather is too dangerous, that it's too late in the season, that they will come back in the spring. They sail away. John White never goes back. Spring comes and goes, and the privateering fleet has other business. Another year passes, then another. White tries to arrange another expedition, but Raleigh's interest has shifted. The colony has become a financial and political liability. England has other priorities. White spends his final years in Ireland haunted, writing letters that describe his grief in language that is devastating even 400 years later. He describes the colony as my discomforts. He describes his inability to return as the defining failure of his life. He died, historians believe, around 1593, never knowing what happened to Eleanor, to Ananias, to Virginia, to any of the 117 people he left behind. That is the historical record. That is what we know for certain. And now we step into the territory that has consumed researchers for 4 centuries. What actually happened? The theory that has the most support among modern archaeologists and historians is also in many ways the most humane. The colonists survived. They did not die. They integrated themselves into the local native population, specifically the Croatoan people, and lived out their lives not as lost colonists, but as members of a community that absorbed them. Think about it from a pure survival standpoint. The colonists were running low on food. They had limited agricultural knowledge relevant to this specific environment. The native peoples of the region had been living off this land successfully for generations. They knew which plants were edible, how to preserve food for winter, where to fish, how to navigate the waterways. If the English wanted to survive, they needed native help. And if the native peoples were willing to provide it, particularly the Croatoan, who had a long, mostly positive relationship with the English, then integration is not just plausible, it's the obvious choice. Here's where the historical record gets genuinely fascinating. In 1709, 120 years after the colony disappeared, an English explorer and naturalist named John Lawson traveled through the Carolina interior and coastline. He kept detailed journals of everything he observed, and when he encountered the native people living on and around what had been Croatoan Island, a group he called the Hatteras Indians, he recorded something that stopped him cold. Many of these people had gray eyes. Some had lighter skin than he expected. And several of them told him, as a matter of cultural pride and oral tradition, that their ancestors had been, and this is Lawson's own phrasing, white people who could talk in books. White people who could talk in books, people who could read. English colonists remembered in native oral tradition more than a century after they vanished. Lawson was not writing a sensational story. He was a scientist, a careful observer, documenting what he saw and heard. He had no obvious motive to fabricate this account. He was writing in a personal journal, not performing for an audience. The gray eyes detail is striking because gray eyes are a European genetic trait, essentially absent in pre-contact Native American populations. For a native community to display a significant number of gray-eyed individuals in 1709 suggests genuine European ancestry from somewhere. And the Roanoke colonists are the obvious, historically documented source. The oral tradition detail is equally striking. Native American communities preserved history through oral tradition with remarkable accuracy. The Hatteras people were not guessing about their ancestry. They were reporting what their grandparents' grandparents had told them. But the story gets more complicated when you introduce another group. The Lumbee people of North Carolina. The Lumbee are a Native American tribe who have lived in Robeson County, in the interior of North Carolina, for as long as their oral history extends. In the 19th century, American researchers and genealogists began noticing something extraordinary about the Lumbee. A significant number of them bore English surnames, not random English surnames, surnames specifically drawn from the Roanoke colonist roster. Names like Dare, names like White, names like Cooper, Harvey, Sampson, and others that appear on the original list of 117 colonists. The Lumbee themselves have long maintained that they are, in part, descended from the Roanoke colonist and from the Croatoan and other Algonquian peoples of the region. This claim has been disputed, studied, supported, and attacked in roughly equal measure over the past century and a half. DNA analysis has been conducted, with results that are suggestive but not yet conclusive, partly because the genetic markers needed are complicated by centuries of intermarriage with other populations. But here is what the DNA analysis has shown. The Lumbee have a genetic profile that is distinct from other Native American groups in ways consistent with significant historical admixture with European populations. That admixture appears to predate the major European colonial contact of the 17th century, which means it came from somewhere in the 16th century. which means, and this is not certain but it is consistent, it may well have come from the Roanoke colonists. Not every historian is satisfied with the peaceful integration theory, and they have good reasons not to be, because there is another piece of historical evidence that points in a much darker direction. In 1607, nearly 20 years after the colony disappeared, English settlers established Jamestown in Virginia, the first permanent English settlement in America. The Jamestown colonists were desperate for any information about what had become of the Roanoke settlers, both for practical reasons and because the mystery had become a genuine source of anxiety and legend back in England. And they got information, disturbing information. The paramount chief of the powerful Powhatan Confederacy, a man named Wahunsena Ka, known to history as Chief Powhatan and famous as the father of Pocahontas, told English officials at Jamestown that he had ordered the Roanoke colonists killed. Powhatan's account, as recorded by English officials including Captain John Smith, was this: the Roanoke colonists had not died on Roanoke Island. Instead, they had lived for approximately 20 years among a friendly tribe called the Chesapeake, who lived near the southern shore of Chesapeake Bay. They had survived. They had integrated. They had built a life. But Powhatan had a problem with them. Within the spiritual traditions of the Powhatan Confederacy, there existed a prophecy, a warning that a nation rising from the direction of the Chesapeake would one day overthrow Powhatan's empire. Powhatan interpreted this prophecy as referring to the English, and he decided to act preemptively. He ordered his warriors to attack the Chesapeake tribe and to kill the English living among them. If this account is accurate, and that is a significant if, it would mean the Roanoke colonists survived for approximately 2 decades. It would mean they built a life with the Chesapeake people. It would mean baby Virginia Dare, born in August of 1587, would have been roughly 20 years old when she was killed. And it would mean John White's entire hopeful interpretation of the carved message, his belief that no cross meant no danger, was wrong. Not because the colonists were in danger when they left Roanoke, but because the danger came later. Powhatan had an obvious motive to lie, or at least to exaggerate. Claiming credit for destroying the English colonists was a show of power to the new English settlers at Jamestown. It was a message. I have killed your people before, and I can kill them again. So historians debate whether Powhatan was speaking historical truth or political theater. But in 2007, archaeologists working in the area that Powhatan described found something significant. They located what appears to be the site of a Chesapeake tribal settlement. And the evidence at the site is consistent with a violent, destructive event. The settlement appears to have been burned. The signs are consistent with an attack, not a natural disaster or an orderly abandonment. We cannot say with certainty that the Roanoke colonists were there. We cannot say with certainty that Powhatan's warriors destroyed this settlement, but the physical evidence does not contradict Powhatan's account. And that is troubling. There is a third major theory, and it is in some ways the most scientifically grounded. The colonists did not survive because of human violence, but because of environmental catastrophe, specifically because of drought. In the 1990s, a team of scientists led by dendrochronologist, that is, a scientist who studies tree rings, David Stahl, analyzed ancient bald cypress trees growing in the Tidewater region of Virginia and North Carolina. Tree rings are one of the most reliable environmental records we have. Wide rings indicate good growing years with plenty of rainfall. Narrow rings indicate drought years. And what Stahl's team found was extraordinary. The years 1587 to 1589, the exact years when the Roanoke colony was established and then cut off from resupply, correspond to the most severe drought in the Tidewater region in almost 800 years of recorded tree ring data. 800 years. This was not a bad few summers. This was a once-in-8 centuries environmental catastrophe. Think about what that means for the colonists. They arrived during one of the driest summers in nearly a millennium. Their crops failed or never properly grew. The freshwater sources they were depending on became unreliable or dried up. The wildlife and fish populations that the local tribes depended on were stressed. and the local tribes, already dealing with their own food shortages, now had over 100 extra mouths to consider feeding. This environmental context completely reframes the story. The colonists did not just face the challenges of settling a new land. They faced those challenges during an extreme climate event that would have stressed even established communities with generations of local knowledge. Their departure from Roanoke was not just prudent. It may have been necessary for simple survival. And this connects back to the integration theory in a powerful way. If both the English and the Croatoan were struggling with drought, that actually creates more pressure for integration, not less. A merged community, pooling resources and knowledge, might survive what neither group could survive alone. That is not charity. That is mutual necessity. In 1998, a research project called the Lost Colony DNA Project began the painstaking work of trying to find descendants of the Roanoke colonists through genetic analysis. The project focuses specifically on male line descendants through the surname Dare and other Roanoke colony surnames, using Y chromosome DNA that is passed directly from father to son, across generations with minimal change. The project is still ongoing. Progress has been made. There are individuals living today in North Carolina whose Y chromosome DNA profiles are consistent with descent from the Roanoke colonists. This does not prove the Lumbee descent theory definitively. Genetics is complicated, and proving a specific 500-year-old connection requires a level of specificity that current technology struggles to achieve. But the data is consistent with the theory, and researchers are cautiously optimistic. Meanwhile, archaeological work at the site called Site X, a location in present-day Bertie County, North Carolina, about 50 miles from Roanoke Island near the junction of the Chowan and Roanoke rivers, has produced tantalizing results. In 2012, the First Colony Foundation announced that they had found evidence of a settlement at this location that appears to date to the late 16th century and contains both native and European artifacts mixed together. Copper pieces, a fragment of early English pottery, evidence of structures. This is exactly what you would expect to find if a mixed community of English colonists and native people had settled in this location. The artifacts are not definitive. They could have arrived through trade rather than residence. But they are consistent with what the theories predict. In 2020 and subsequent years, more detailed excavations at Site X have continued to produce artifacts and structural evidence. The work is careful, methodical, and ongoing. Researchers are increasingly confident that Site X represents either a Roanoke colonist settlement or a location closely connected to their story. And then there is the Dare Stone controversy, which is one of the strangest footnotes in this entire saga. In 1937, a man named Lewis Hammond claimed to have found a carved stone near Edenton, North Carolina, with an inscription purportedly written by Eleanor Dare, describing the colony's fate, disease, native attacks, and the deaths of many colonists. The stone was initially taken seriously by scholars. Then, over 40 more stones appeared at various locations across the southeast, each with additional messages supposedly from Eleanor. The whole collection was eventually exposed as an elaborate hoax, almost certainly fabricated by a man named Bill Eberhardt, who was apparently motivated by nothing more than the desire to cause chaos in the academic world. The stones are fake, but they are a useful reminder of how desperate people, including scholars, are for any answer to this mystery, and how that desperation can be exploited. Here is what we know. Here is the honest, unflinching summary of 400 years of research. We know that 117 English colonists settled on Roanoke Island in the summer of 1587. We know that Governor John White left 9 days after his granddaughter was born, intending to return with supplies within months. We know that he was delayed for 3 years by the Spanish Armada and the resulting war. We know that when he returned in 1590, the settlement was orderly abandoned, not destroyed. We know that the word Croatoan was carved without a distress marker. We know that no contemporary graves, no contemporary massacre site, and no contemporary skeletons of English colonists have ever been definitively identified. We know, from the 1709 account of John Lawson, that a native community on Croatoan Island displayed unusual physical features and claimed English ancestry within the living memory of the colonial period. We know the Lumbee people carry English surnames from the colonist roster. We know the DNA evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. We know that Site X in Bertie County has produced 16th century artifacts consistent with a mixed English native settlement. We know that Chief Powhatan claimed to have ordered the colonists' deaths, that this claim cannot be verified, and that archaeological evidence in the area he described is consistent with but does not confirm his account. We know that the period 1587 to 1589 was the worst drought in 800 years in the Tidewater region. What we do not know is the complete story. What we do not know is what Virginia Dare looked like when she grew up. What we do not know is whether Eleanor Dare survived to old age, and whether she ever told her children about England, about the voyage across the ocean, about the grandfather who left and never came back. What we do not know is whether John White's interpretation was right, whether the lack of a distress cross meant his people were safe when they left that island, whether they found the Croatoan and were welcomed and survived and built lives and had children who are walking around North Carolina today with gray eyes and English surnames, and no idea they carry a 400-year-old mystery in their blood. I want to close with something that I think about every time I revisit this story. John White's last recorded piece of writing about Roanoke, a letter that survives in the British Museum to this day, ends with a line that is one of the saddest things I have ever read in historical primary sources. He writes that he has committed the relief of his discomfort to the merciful help of the Almighty. He is talking about his colony. He is talking about the people he left behind. He is saying, I have done everything I can do. I cannot help them. I can only pray. He never found out what happened. He died not knowing. And 430-some years later, sitting here in the 21st century with satellite imagery and DNA analysis and ground-penetrating radar and all the tools of modern science, we still cannot give him the full answer. But here is what I believe, based on everything the evidence suggests. I believe the Roanoke colonists survived Roanoke Island. I believe they walked away from that settlement deliberately, methodically, with a plan, and that the plan was to join the Croatoan. I believe that in the decades that followed, English men and women and children and grandchildren lived alongside the native people of the Carolina coast, planting crops and fishing and telling stories and raising families. I believe that Virginia Dare grew up. I believe she learned the languages of both worlds, the English her parents spoke, and the Algonquian of the people around her. I believe she had children of her own, and I believe that somewhere in North Carolina today, there are people in whose veins flows the blood of that first American, that 9-day-old baby who was left behind when her grandfather sailed away into the gray Atlantic and never came back. The mystery of Roanoke is not really a mystery of death. I think it is a mystery of transformation, of what happens when two worlds collide, and some people, instead of fighting or fleeing, choose to become something new together. That is the story of America, really. It started right here, on a thin island off the coast of North Carolina, with 117 people and one carved word on a post. Thank you for watching the Mystery Archive. If this story moved you the way it moves me every time I tell it, please subscribe. We do this every week, and every week we go looking for the stories that history almost forgot. Hit the bell so you don't miss them. And if you want to go deeper on Roanoke, I'll link the best books and the First Colony Foundation's ongoing archaeological reports in the description below. They are doing incredible work, and they are getting closer to the answer every year. I'll see you next time.